Hey everyone, I'm Liz Merrick from the Sugar Geek Show, and today we're talking about ganache. How to make it, what it's used for, and the one thing that nobody ever talks about when everything goes wrong. It's all happening right here on the Sugar Geek Show. You know what I hate? When someone says, oh, it's so easy. It's so easy. You just do these simple steps and boom, you have a perfect product. That's what they always say about ganache. They say it's so easy. And it's true. Actually making ganache is super simple. You heat up some cream, you pour it on some chocolate, you stir it all up, voila, ganache. Well, if it's so easy and so foolproof, how come so many people have such difficulty? It's too firm, it's too soft, it's too watery, it's not watery enough, it's broken, it's grainy, it's oily. All of these things can go wrong. So what is the deal with ganache? And how do we figure out how to fix it? If you've ever read a recipe or heard anybody talk about ganache, they usually talk about something called ratios. I know ratios are super confusing. I'm like not a math person. I can barely add and subtract. So when somebody says, make your ganache with a 2-to-1 ratio, my brain just like shut down immediately. But for all you people out there who are like me, let me just explain in simple terms. If I have a 2-to-1 ratio for ganache, that basically means I have twice as much chocolate as I have cream. The first number is always the chocolate, the second number is always the cream. So if you have a 1-to-1 ratio, equal parts chocolate, equal parts cream. For me to make sense of this, I always start with the cream. If I have 8 ounces of cream, I'm going to have 16 ounces of chocolate. That's a 2-to-1 ratio. But for the longest time, that confused me because I'm just so used to seeing recipes like 8 ounces chocolate, 4 ounces cream, that's the recipe. And then I would just double it or triple it. I didn't understand the whole ratio thing, but that's what it means. But let's back up for just 1 second and talk about how you actually make ganache. So how do you actually make ganache? Well, I think here's the part where people say making ganache is so easy, because actually it really is when you know what ratios you're supposed to be using and you're familiar with the type of chocolate that you're using. All you do is measure out your chocolate by weight. You really want to go by weight because if you try to use cups, you're gonna totally waste all of your materials. 1 cup of chocolate is not the same as 1 cup of milk or 1 cup of water or 1 cup of whatever. You have to go by weight. Kitchen scales are really inexpensive. You can get them at the grocery store. You can buy them on Amazon. There's no excuse not to use a scale. Bowl on top of the scale and you clear it or press tare so that it says 0. This is basically telling the scale, hey, ignore the fact that there's a bowl on here. I only want you to measure the chocolate. After you have your scale cleared, you want to go ahead and start adding your chocolate. We're going to start with an easy ratio of 2-to-1. So let's say 16 ounces of chocolate. Then we're going to heat up our cream, 8 ounces. Twice as much chocolate as cream, 2-to-1. Now when you're heating up your cream, I definitely recommend doing it on the stove top so that it gets it nice and hot, but you want to watch it carefully. It's only going to take a couple of minutes for it to start to steam. That means you'll start to see maybe a couple of bubbles going through the surface of the cream and steam will start rising and it's about to boil, but you want to take it off before it boils because it will boil over. Even when I was making this video and I knew that I was supposed to watch my pot of cream, what did I do? I turned around, I started doing the dishes, and the pot boiled over. So the downside to that is you can accidentally scorch your cream, which you can taste, and it's a horrible mess to clean up. But other than that, it should be okay. As long as it's not scorched and it still tastes good, you can still use it. Pour your cream over the top of your chocolate and then use a spatula to kind of press down the chocolate to make sure it's submerged in the cream, and then just let it sit for like 5 minutes. This just gives time for the chocolate to soften up and become one with the cream. Use your whisk to whisk it all up. At first it's going to look weird and lumpy and kind of grainy, and then magically it starts coming together and looking beautiful and delicious. If your ratios are wrong, you're definitely going to notice at this point. When you first get done making your ganache, this is the liquid stage. This is the stage that you can use your ganache to pour over a frozen cake and make a glaze. You can use it to make a drip around a chilled cake to make that perfect chocolate ganache drip. Or you could pour it over ice cream and yummy desserts like that. If you let this ganache sit at room temperature for 30 minutes to an hour, depending on how cold your room is, it's gonna start to solidify. That means the cocoa butter in your chocolate is starting to firm up as it cools down. When it gets to the stage that I call peanut butter consistency, this is the perfect stage to start frosting your cake or for frosting your cupcakes. It's really loose, but still firm enough that you can scoop it up with your spatula. If your ganache is so hard that it's tearing the crumbs right off of your cake, it's too hard and you need to microwave it for like 5 seconds, maybe 10 seconds until it's back to that peanut butter consistency. If you microwave it for too long, it's gonna be back at the drip consistency. It's okay, but you're gonna have to wait for it to firm up again. If you let your chocolate ganache sit at room temperature overnight, you are going to see the firmness that your ganache is at its final stage. If it's really, really hard, maybe add a little bit more cream to your ganache so it's not quite so firm at room temperature. If it never hardens, then obviously it's too soft and you wanna add a little bit more chocolate to your ganache. Ideally, your chocolate ganache is a nice creamy consistency, about the consistency of like room temperature butter on a not too hot day. Does that make sense? It holds its shape, but you can still make a mark in it with your finger. It's still creamy. It's still yummy to eat. Now here's the deal. If you put your ganache covered cake in the refrigerator, it's gonna get really hard. And that's a good thing. That makes covering the cake in fondant super easy. It makes transportation a lot more safe. But if your ganache is staying really hard, even after it comes back to room temperature, maybe adjust your ratios. So how do you know what ratio is the right ratio for chocolate? That is where it gets super tricky. Some people say the correct ratio is 1:1. I've read in several pastry books. I learned in pastry school. I've even read in some of my Facebook groups that 1:1 is the correct ratio. But whenever I make 1:1, my ganache is super, super loose and never seems to fully set up. So I get really confused. What am I doing wrong? And why does this person think that this is what ganache is supposed to look like? The next ratio is 2:1, so twice as much chocolate as cream. This is the one that works for me and results in a pretty firm ganache at room temperature, but it sets up and seems to work the way that I think ganache should work, but I keep wondering if 2:1 is really the correct ratio. And then there's white chocolate ganache. You can't use a 2:1 ratio with white chocolate ganache or it'll never set. So I go with a 3:1 ratio and that sets up pretty good. But one time I used a different kind of white chocolate and it never set. What's that about? So let's talk about the thing that nobody ever talks about when it comes to making ganache. Not all chocolate is the same. And I'm not talking about white chocolate, dark chocolate, milk chocolate. I'm talking about, let's say, all dark chocolate, all semi-sweet chocolate. If I go to Winco, which is where I buy my chocolate from, and I buy the Tard dark chocolate, and I use a 2:1 ratio, it works perfectly. If I use my Calabo, super expensive, high quality chocolate, still dark chocolate, and I use a 2:1 ratio, my ganache breaks and is super oily. Wouldn't the high quality chocolate be a better choice and be more successful than my Winco bulk chocolate? Here's the thing. Different types of chocolate have different percentages of cocoa in them. On my Calabo bag, you can literally see the percentage of cocoa that is contained in that chocolate. This one is 60%. Others could be 70% or 53%. It just depends. My Guittard chocolate is 53%. What does that mean? Basically, it means the more cocoa that is in your chocolate, the thicker it's going to be and the firmer it's going to set up. So if I'm using a 2:1 ratio, twice as much chocolate as cream, with my super high quality, super mega cocoa chocolate, it's gonna set up like a rock. And when it's in its ganache stage, it's barely liquid and it's breaking because there's actually not enough liquid in there. So I switched it up to a 1:1 ratio with my super expensive Calabo chocolate. And what do you know? Perfect ganache. Same type of chocolate, different ratios. Nobody ever talks about this. Everybody just says, oh, 2:1 or 1:1 or 3:1, and nobody says why that works or doesn't work. So how can you figure out how this applies to your chocolate? Well, this is what I did. I took all of the chocolate that I have and I started with a 2-to-1 ratio. For my Callebaut, that was too thick. So I slowly added in 4 ounces of cream at a time until I got the consistency that I thought looked like a proper ganache, which is creamy, smooth, no lumps or bumps, and it's not broken. And this is what I got. This is my Callebaut dark chocolate ganache that's been sitting on the workbench for 6 hours, and it's still soft, still creamy, it's still frosting. It hasn't turned into like truffles. When I make my ganache with my Guittard chocolate, I have to use a 2-to-1 ratio, otherwise it's too loose. But when my Guittard chocolate sets at room temperature, it is super firm. It is not creamy. It is like really hard. And a lot of cake decorators have asked me, how do I make my ganache so that it is not super firm at room temperature? Because they want it to taste good when you're biting into it. So my recommendation is to add a little cream to your current ratio, see if that works for you and it stays at a softer consistency, and then do that every time. Stick with the same chocolate. Stick with the same cream. If you change anything, your results are going to change. That's why a lot of people say that their ganache is inconsistent. It's not you, it's not your environment, it's your chocolate. So for me, I know that my Callebaut 60% cocoa, I do a 1-to-1 ratio. I know that for my dark chocolate Guittard, I do a 2-to-1 ratio. I know for my Guittard milk chocolate, I do a 2.5-to-1 ratio. And for my vanilla white chocolate, I do a 3-to-1 ratio. Here's the weird thing though. When it comes to white chocolate, it doesn't matter if I use my Guittard Vanilla Appeals, which is kind of like a higher end chocolate, but still not as good as the really good white chocolate. When I use the Guittard chocolate, I get good results with a 3-to-1, but when I use the Valrhona, super good, high quality, expensive white chocolate, I still use 3-to-1. Maybe it's the fact that it's white chocolate and it doesn't have any cocoa in it. For me, the 3-to-1 worked best. But when I made white chocolate using Wilton candy melts, I did not have good results. It actually stayed super liquidy the whole day and then it got rock hard. You could probably make white chocolate ganache with your melties, but it's not going to act the same way as a higher quality white chocolate. So if you're having problems with your white chocolate turning into a proper ganache, maybe try a higher quality of white chocolate like Guittard. Another note about making ganache, getting the little lumps and bumps in it. These can happen from 2 different things. One of it could be that your chocolate is just not melting all the way. Especially with white chocolate, because there's so little cream, I actually take the whole bowl, pop it back in the microwave for a minute, and then stir it just to make sure that all the chocolate is melted. The second thing you can do is you can take your immersion blender and blend your ganache to get all the little lumps and bumps out of it. And then you'll have super smooth ganache. The last thing you have to remember is when you make your ganache, it's really important to cover the surface with a layer of plastic wrap as it sets. That way you don't develop a crusty film where the chocolate is touching the air's surface, because when you go to mix that up, that crusty film turns into lumps and bumps inside your chocolate ganache. So what happens if your ganache breaks and is like separating and is all oily and thick? You can fix it. Add a tablespoon of warm milk or even water to your ganache and whisk. And keep doing this until it comes together, is a smooth consistency, and doesn't look broken anymore. Pretty much anything that goes wrong with ganache is fixable. If you left your ganache on the countertop and it's super grainy, remelt the whole thing either in the microwave or over a pot of boiling water until it's all smooth and creamy, and let it reset. If your ganache is too thick and it's hardening up super fast and you can't even work with it, this is a great consistency for making truffles, but not a great consistency for piping on your cakes. Add an ounce of cream at a time until it's a thinner consistency and you're happy with how thick it is. If your ganache is too thin, you can melt down some chocolate and add it back into your ganache so that it's thicker. So that's everything I learned about making ganache. Hopefully that has answered your questions. You feel more confident about making ganache at home, and you know that it's more than just following a recipe. It has everything to do with the kind of chocolate that you're using. If you have any questions about ganache specifically, you can leave them down there in the comments. And if you want a community of supportive and helpful cake decorators, you can join our Facebook group, Sugar Geeks. Hey everyone, Liz from the Sugar Geek Show. Hopefully you enjoyed my video. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button if you're new to my channel, and don't forget to ding the bell so you get a notification every time I make a new video or recipe. New tutorials every Tuesday. Thanks for watching. Bye!